You are actually correlating this to Operation Argus, which we spoke of in an earlier episode, where they launched nuclear missiles into the upper atmosphere in order to see what sort of radiational changes it causes, or if they can create a radiation belt that would stop missiles coming from Russia.
A child prodigy created a machine when he was really young that could project sound into a person's head using frequencies. And he said that HAARP made him afraid because he knew what it could potentially do.
We got a human subject within a triangular shaped craft show up in the data as well. So this would be outside of the Earth's atmosphere somewhere.
What would the ramifications be of this when you're talking about having different types of arrays around the planet so that they could all connect together?
They destroyed the old pole.
Yeah, he mentioned they blew it up.
Yeah, they said they blew it up and some vehicles disappeared into a hole.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Metaphysical podcast. Whistleblowers have started having a stronger and stronger voice in the public now that UFOs and advanced technology are becoming more accepted. And with all this firsthand testimony and whistleblower accounts, there's just a lot to unpack. Last time we started talking about Eric Hecker, who worked on a base in Antarctica, and we talked about the IceCube South Pole Neutrino Observatory. Along the way, John brought us some amazing remote viewing data on what's really happening in this frigid wasteland off limits to almost everyone. But in that episode, we ran out of time to talk about what the old pole station really is, what happens when the green laser Eric Hecker saw beams out into the cosmos, and so much more, like the strange technology and amazing things happening there. So join remote viewer John Vivanco and me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a show that's sure to be out of this world.
Yeah, and if you're listening to us or watching us on a video platform, make sure you leave us a 5-star rating and review. It really helps. And make sure you like and subscribe, hit the bell, or whatever you kids are doing these days with your little phones. And just listen. It's all fun. All right, let's go.
All right. John, how you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. Yeah. What a crazy episode last week we had. And for those of you who think we're crazy right now listening to this, you probably want to go back and watch that last episode so you know what we're talking about, because we covered a lot. Eric Hecker here, he's bringing up just a lot of things, and we're going to get into a little bit more right now about this IceCube neutrino detector and some of the strange characteristics of this thing. And so he mentioned that the South Pole facility is an air traffic control facility for activities on this planet and off, even at an exceptionally great distance, which would allude to there being a reason for that communication, which we kind of covered in the last episode, right? Like, you think, John, that there is communications basically off planet that they're using this thing for?
I mean, that's what the data was portraying, was in part communication off planet, because this thing could do so many different things, not just detect, and it doesn't analyze neutrinos. It detects them and where they came from, produces a whole bunch of data on where they came from and what is in them. And so that data gets analyzed. And I don't know like how they parse the data between like just celestial type things, natural celestial type things, versus communication type things. Obviously, it's easier to send out energy in bursts in order to send out communications that nobody really know about. But like this data has to get parsed by someone, and I don't know how they separate that from the natural stuff.
There's so many different buckets that the neutrino detector sort of stuff falls into. It's definitely accomplishing more than one task. And this is really interesting. So an area of the IceCube layout compared to sub-ice layout, the many tasks assigned to IceCube neutrino detector can affect the magnetosphere of the planet when being utilized. So this IceCube neutrino detector actually affects the magnetosphere. And because of this impact upon the magnetosphere, it's monitored from the South Pole station so they can see what's going on. So this is where the HARP stuff starts coming in
Yeah,
here.
HARP
Like
and scalar type technologies. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And, you know, the HARP array is all on the surface there, right? And they use Alaska because it is closer to, I guess, the ionosphere at that part of the United States. But what we're talking about in Antarctica is most likely and even closer to that area of the ionosphere in a very secretive place that has essentially even more power than HARP, according to Eric Hecker.
Right. Power. I mean, that was one of his big questions, actually. Like, where are they getting the power for this stuff?
That was like a large part of this, where he discussed that, you know, this ELF machine, I guess you could say, was allegedly shut off. He was told over and over again that this thing was no longer working. The power to it was no longer working. And here we have it, where he actually goes to a place and finds that the power actually is on. So when he, you know, one of these alarms goes off, he has to go check some things out, and he sees that the power to the ELF equipment is actually turned on, and then corroborates this and finds out that there is another scientist there that's sending the data back out somewhere from this ELF machine, whatever you want to call it. So it was obviously working, and they're using it for something. And
Right.
the ELFs, the extremely low frequency waves, are specifically the things that can cause the disturbances in the earth, because they can penetrate into the earth, resonate with other parts of the earth, and potentially create an earthquake.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. They can. And yeah, I guess it's like someone left a light switch on there, but not, and they're still using it, which, okay. So when you combine that with the power of the IceCube, with the power of the laser, et cetera, you know, and others are saying, well, I don't understand. Like, how are they powering all this stuff? We're supposed to be on the inside here because we're taking care of a lot of aspects, and we need to know, but something that they don't know.
So they discussed that there used to be an old nuclear facility around there,
Right.
and
So
he
that
had
was like what, in the 1950s or something was brought in
something like that. Like he was
before the
postulating that.
treaty.
Right, before the treaty, he postulated that it was potentially this nuclear facility was still in operation, and that this is what was operating and giving power to, I mean, a lot of the machinery on the IceCube detector. And what do you think about that, John?
Well, I mean, I think he said something along the lines of it. There could have been some type of reactor, nuclear reactor, put in place, and then it was grandfathered in it after the treaty, so that they
Right.
could keep like building to it and adding it because they already had an in on it, whereas they wouldn't be able to bring that in after the treaty. But I would say that those guys would just say, "Who cares about a treaty?"
Exactly. Yeah, but it is interesting that he's kind of dotting his I's and crossing his T's with how he's explaining this stuff, because
Right.
between you and I would assume like no one's going to care about a treaty if they need to bring more power down there to conduct their scientific experiments. They're just going to
Yeah.
do it,
Yeah.
right?
No one's going to care.
So the question is really, before we get into a little bit more about HARP, what HARP is and what it can do, and then we compare that to the IceCube detector, what kind of exotic energy do you think that they're using to power this stuff?
Well, that was actually one of the things that we looked at with remote viewing to understand it a little bit better, albeit it's a little difficult because it
It's
seems to
vague.
be some.
It's a vague question you're asking, right? Like,
Yeah, it's a vague question, and at the same time, you know, when you do get data, it turns out to be stuff you don't quite understand because we have our layer of understanding on energy sources based off of what we've been told, right? And so, how do you apply something exotic when you don't understand exotic, right? But I would say that this is borderline exotic. And so, the data that we got, what we have is like almost like a sun, a miniature sun being produced, and it's contained within this structure. It's like layered up with like these crisscross layers, and it's contained within a structure. It's not a very big thing. It's not, I mean, it's big, but it's not like super duper big like we would think of a nuclear power plant. And this thing creates enough energy to be able to fuel every single thing down there and then some. And what I think it is in part is some type of fusion reactor, but pushing it more on an exotic side. This is not like a nuclear, straight up nuclear reactor. This is some type of fusion reactor, but beyond even what we understand, like in the public realm, a fusion reactor does. So it looks like there's something like that there.
Some type of more advanced version of that, almost like Tony Stark's arc reactor or something, where
Yeah,
he's got this like,
right.
remember in the first movie, there's this like
Yeah,
massive arc reactor,
right.
right.
Yeah,
And then
right.
he had to figure out how to make that smaller. And,
Right.
it's funny that we have to use these pop culture
I know.
references to understand what the hell they're doing out there.
It's so ridiculous. But like creatives, if they don't have inside information in Hollywood, which they often do, creatives when they write things, I mean, they're tapping into truths quite often, and so it's just going to be out there. It's like one of the last episodes talking about that strange octagonal thing that
Oh, yeah.
was, yeah, it was on Ancient Aliens, and Linda Moulton Howe presented it. Like the story that we got out of that with remote viewing was like this. I think you said the Sith Lords from Star Wars, right? Where the beings that were that put that there were trying to make themselves more powerful by collecting genetic material and changing their genetics and using dark sorcery at the same time. Creatives will either tap into something, or if it's Hollywood, they'll just get fed like, put this in there, put that in there. Hey, we're telling you, but you're not paying attention.
Right. Right. Which is actually, we might want to even do a couple of shows just on that. I can actually present several movies that we can remote view and see where they actually, the original stories came from, because I'm quite sure with some of the research that we've done that there's a bunch that these directors have been given information from 3-letter agencies to produce these things.
And we know, I mean, there's so much documentation that intelligence 3-letter agency is specifically one completely embedded within Hollywood.
And I do think too that human beings, it's like they're not even aware of where their thoughts come from. And so sometimes the inspiration that they get could be real things that they think that they've created because they've had this like epiphany about something. And it's just, we know so little about how thoughts work. Why not? Why
Yeah,
isn't
look at like microwave pulsed audiograms, which are a thing.
Yeah. And this actually goes so funny because this goes straight back to HARP, where, we start talking about Dr. Flanagan, who we've mentioned on this show before, a child prodigy, created a machine when he was really young that could project sound into a person's head using frequencies. And he said that HARP made him afraid because he knew what it could potentially do. And so we're talking about using high frequency waves and low frequency waves, and they can be used for many different things. I mean, also the Montauk Project is one of these things that we've mentioned on occasion here, where they were using a radar system to project all kinds of things into the local area and do experiments with frequencies, at very specific megahertz, right?
They'll just try and do things. They have no idea what the outcome's going to be, but they just do it anyway, man. It's just trying to create some resonant frequency in a community to cause people to do weird things is just not right.
Well, and I think that this is where the chip on Eric Hecker's shoulder comes from, is, he and his team are sent down. Yeah, they're sent down to Antarctica. They think they're doing, I guess, normal work down there, and they're in a whole lot of danger with exotic machinery. They don't know what effect these things are going to have on their own bodies, and they're constantly being put into a situation, a very dangerous situation on a daily basis with all of these things. I mean, who knows what could happen to these, like a person's body, if you're near a energy system similar to the one that you described, a sun in a contained environment that's smaller, right? Like,
right. I mean, he was saying too that because they had nuclear technology down there, he was talking about how they were getting radiation interference in some of the equipment. And so they started measuring the radiation, saying, there's something going on here. There's something going on here. There's radiation. And so the higher authorities said, okay, well, we'll block off the radiation. And so they claimed that they blocked off the radiation. But instead, what they did is they just removed that from the data sets while they
Right.
continued to pummel these people with radiation.
That's so unethical. Like
Yeah,
you can't like it was I think it was made so clear to him that they didn't care about them or their lives that he just was like, well, I'm going to expose this then.
right.
Cuz I'm not getting from him, when I hear certain whistleblowers talk, like Snowden, there's something else in there. I feel like when he's describing things, I'm not getting that from this guy. He just seems like a normal dude from the Northeast telling everyone what he experienced down there.
Right, exactly. Like with Snowden, I have a BS detector that goes off.
Same here.
Yeah.
Same here. It's a weird thing. Like I find that less with some of these other whistleblowers, that come out, but Snowden just seemed like there was complicated factors, we'll say, behind a lot of this stuff.
There are complicated factors behind it all.
When I was doing my initial research on HARP, I just kind of want to explain a little bit of this to you because we found that the IceCube neutrino detector could be used for long range transmitting and all kinds of frequency, high frequency and low frequency. They're calling it a direct energy weapon. Like what are the capabilities of stuff like this? Well, the patents for HARP that I tracked down showed that HARP could be used to beam certain frequencies into the ionosphere that would literally make it impossible for, I guess you could say, enemy missiles to be shot into the air without being turned off from these frequencies. In terms of defense for the United States, when you have this HARP is in Alaska right next to Russia, who during the Cold War, they were the biggest enemy. HARP's being developed in the 80s and the 90s to do these experiments. It goes live in, I think it was like 1999, something like that. You've got a system that can basically beam into the ionosphere and it will shut down any missiles that get shot up there right away. Nothing can.
You know what you're doing? You know what you're doing right now is you are actually correlating this to Operation Argus, which we spoke of in an earlier episode, where they launched nuclear missiles into the upper atmosphere in order to see what sort of radiational changes it causes, or if they can create a radiation belt that would stop missiles coming from Russia. So my guess is that based off of the data that they got out of Operation Argus, they understood what frequency, what electromagnetic frequency or whatever, and then they created an antenna array to beam that. I mean, that's probably what HARP originally was intended for.
You're blowing my mind right now because like this just proves everything we've been saying, that all of these operations are usually a compilation of previous operations that they've jammed into another one to do a separate set of experiments.
Right.
They'll start one up, they'll gain all of the data they can from it, they'll shut it down, they'll start it new somewhere else under a different name to acquire different data.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and HARP, I mean, there's so much you could do with HARP, even from, just the standpoint of what I just said. Never mind when you're talking about the extremely low frequency waves, which I've mentioned in previous episodes, could beam into the ground, find caverns, find gold, find water, see what's in the ocean. I mean, if they're using Wi-Fi now, where you can actually detect what's going on in a room using the Wi-Fi, imagine what you can do with low frequency waves across the entire Earth, even inside the Earth.
Exactly. Yeah.
And where's all that data going? I mean, it's probably going down into Antarctica somewhere, And honestly, like, what would the ramifications be of this when you're talking about having different types of arrays around the planet so that they could all connect together? You're talking about HARP still functioning. You've got this IceCube neutrino detector down there that's also functioning. If they're both beaming at the same time, and we don't know what that could do.
No, we don't. And it's like I'm sure that I think these things are ultimately constructed for the purpose of scientific understanding across the board, unless it was constructed by military industrial complex type situation. I think like all of these, like they're looking for discovery at first, and then they find these other things that could be turned nefarious. This is what they do, is you turn them nefarious, right? They use this as a threat. They use this as a weapon. They use it as a threat in order to have more power and control. It's always the same thing.
John, did you see Oppenheimer yet?
I haven't seen it.
I recommend checking it out. Very interesting film. I really like the way Nolan told this story, although the first 20 minutes were a bit jarring, but the entire story, even up until the very end, like excellent writing. One of the things I thought was really funny was there's a general played by Matt Damon in the movie. And there's no spoilers here, so don't worry about that. But one of the things that I noticed kept getting brought up in was how anal retentive he was about compartmentalization. And I feel like if you really take compartmentalization and you understand it the way these military guys understand it, it changes your understanding of how they might utilize a project like this down here with the IceCube neutrino detector, because you have some people at the very top who know exactly what's going on, like the entire picture, just a couple of people, and then everyone below them doesn't need to know. They only need to know the part that they're responsible for. They get that part done and they deliver it up. This keeps from secrets being told, right?
You know that you know what this is based on? The study of ants.
What? Oh, because of how they build stuff, or
Yeah,
really?
yeah. Anthill. This is actually within intelligence and compartmentalization. That's actually like a reference. Anthill is actually a reference because that's how you compartmentalize things. Ants don't know what they're doing, but as the greater whole goes, they're doing everything for it, but they don't know what the ultimate outcome is to build the anthill.
And all each of them are doing are bringing sand up, handing it over to another guy in a, what do they call those when you're passing a rock to another guy? Assembly line, basically format. It's an assembly line format, right? Well, no, it's exactly like that. It's an assembly line where you've got one guy, he hands things over to another guy. They just do their part, hand it over to the next, do their part, hand it over to the next. That's compartmentalization right there, a different form of it.
Yeah.
This just goes to show you, like, and even Eric Hecker describing this down at the base, that there were guys that he was working with that were being told to do certain things. And he found out slowly some of these things that were being done, but that no one else was supposed to know what these guys were doing. And it had to do with some of the technologies that were supposedly shut off and no one was supposed to know about. Hecker had to trace back systems he was cutting off one time during a safety system routine. And he saw that this ELF panel was basically on, right? So he basically just started becoming, I think at this point, really suspectful about what they were doing and why. I thought it was interesting that he brought this in. He at one point said that there is no hole in the ice near the facility, but that there could be somewhere else. And when he said no hole, he was talking about a gigantic hole to the center of the earth that some people have reported are in the North and the South Pole. It was just interesting that he brought that up.
Well, he's got to. That's like the big conspiracy down there. That's the smoke and mirror conspiracy.
What I thought was cool too is he was like, look, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just wasn't there. So he kind of just like kept going after that. And then he brings up the big thing, which is that this one time he saw a massive, gigantic green laser shoot into the cosmos. Also explained the amount of energy that it would take to power that, which was a actual ridiculous amount of power. He said chilled helium is a superfluid used in chemical lasers. Specifically, green lasers need a ton of power. And he said it stayed on for a really long time. Having the lasers fire at all takes an enormous amount of power, and Hecker saw them sustained for just a gigantic length of time. He thinks it's a long-range form of communication and or system of defense. And then he kind of goes on to speculate that there must be some type of power plant underneath there, which you and I just talked about. Now, what is this green laser, John? Is it a form of communication? What is this thing?
We looked at that thing. What was the purpose of that laser, and beaming that laser, and what he saw. And I mean, his surmising on it is correct. It's specifically for communication. Nothing else. We didn't get anything else around it. I don't know. There could be an aspect of defense that's like tertiary or something, but that thing was to send information, literally to send information. And that information seemed to go to one location. In fact, we got a human subject within a triangular shaped craft show up in the data as well. So this would be outside of the Earth's atmosphere somewhere. And so there's like a relay kind of system when it comes to the laser, where it's a network connected. So you've got the laser that's sending information to one location, and then that one location sends it out. It's kind of like how, because I think lasers could have a limited distance in general. And so it's kind of like the idea of in ancient times when they would build fires on the top of mountains to signal. And so it's part of a system where it'll come to one location, then signal to another, then signal to another, and signal to another. So that's what our data said. He's entirely correct on that as far as what I've seen.
So that's really interesting. It comes down to me though wondering why they're using lasers if neutrinos are faster or potentially faster form of communication. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing with that place. This place is all about communication. Like under the surface there, it's all about communication. So when he says air traffic control for space and deep space, that's what it is. And I know that this guy is getting fed information. Like Hecker is getting fed information as well, I'm sure, or ideas, because his ideas are entirely correct as far as the remote viewing data is concerned. Like we make no assumptions about this at all. We just like do the tasking. We're blind to it. We don't know what it is. Data comes back and it aligns with what this guy is saying. So he's either completely, totally on the ball, coming to conclusions, or somebody's feeding it to him, or he's got him and others are putting it all together, putting all the pieces together. But yeah, he's right. This guy is like dead on. So he is absolutely someone to be listened to.
In a previous episode, you discussed looking at Eric Hecker's intentions. And I think just for the purpose of not having to go back to watch all of that, when you looked at Eric Hecker as a whistleblower, what did you guys find?
He was upset.
Yeah.
He was upset. He was like, he had a bone to pick, literally. Like he literally has got a bone to pick. He didn't like the way they were treated. He doesn't like the way that they're expendable, that anybody's expendable within this. And since he probably didn't have security clearances, I don't know if he did or if he didn't. I don't know if they do have that or non-disclosures. No clue. He's probably, because he's just on a fire brigade, okay, so he did have security clearance.
He had what he called the highest level of security clearance in that area because of his work and the fire, like having to make sure that all these areas were safe.
Okay, so he had security clearance, so he's probably not saying everything that he knows, and those could be the pieces that he's either putting together or whatever. Who knows?
And he's probably talking to people, having quiet conversations about things and creating the story behind the scenes because he's probably really upset about the danger they're being put in.
Right. So if he's breaking security clearances, then that's going to be an issue for him. So he's got to hope that he's protected in the whistleblower box there. Because wow, that's going to be an interesting one. Hopefully he can be protected because he's definitely putting all the puzzle pieces and the right pieces together when it comes to the remote viewing side. And when we get to why he wanted to, like, it's literally him being upset. It's not just about him, it's about all of his friends and the people that work down there, that he is so upset about what happened to them and what continues to happen to people down there in the corporate structure, that he's got to talk about it. He's got to say something.
Well, and he did describe one of his close comrades down there, whatever you want to call them, had to get shipped off of Antarctica from getting sick from something like this. Like, he's seen them go through a lot, and I think, he's just upset.
Right. What's funny is what they call it Havana Syndrome, which is the politically correct terminology for being beamed with frequency weapons, so you go insane or have a stroke.
Right.
Havana Syndrome, right? Remember that came out of Cuba, where the diplomats in Cuba were having real extreme brain issues. Nobody knew what was happening. Nobody ever found out what was going on, at least on the public side. So they just call it Havana Syndrome. But everyone knows that it's directed energy weapons to the brain.
Why are we putting human beings in the line of this type of fire?
Because they're ants.
Yeah, you're right.
It doesn't matter. Another ant's just going to come along, take its place.
So, John, did you get a chance at all to look into this telescope that he's claiming is there?
As far as I know, the telescope he's referring to is the IceCube, because those things are considered telescopes. They're just reading the information in a different way. Right. So they're reading the particles put off by something in deep space, capturing those particles and reading them, and that would be considered a telescope. So as far as I know, that's what he's referring to when he says telescope.
And Lindsay is telling me there also is a telescope there.
I'm sure there absolutely is, and I'm sure there's different types, radio telescopes and visual telescopes, and all sorts of different types of telescopes down there because of the clarity of the atmosphere. You want a place with low light, and there is where you are going to get it. What I would have to do is look a little bit deeper into what he said about a different type of telescope than the IceCube array, and then look into that.
Sure. And we've got something else here that we've got to cover, which is the Old Pole facility. What is this thing?
The Old Pole? That was the previous expedition location where they set up, that would have included some type of nuclear reactor. And then, over time, ice buildup and whatnot got covered up. A lot of the experiments and equipment was deprecated, and they basically just abandoned it, those structures and what they were doing there, to produce new ones with newer technology. And I guess I'm not sure of the year. I'm sure he says the year it was abandoned. But from what I understand, some of the people who were involved in the program would try to sneak in to the Old Pole to find out what's there, because it's off limits. They're not allowed to go there because apparently, it's too dangerous. You can have ice cave-ins, they say, and stuff like that. And so they've pretty much, locked it away from everyone. But I don't know, they probably get drunk and then try and get into the place on New Year's Eve or something. In fact, that's what that one book is about that Hecker brought up. I can't remember the name of it, but probably written by him. Fictional story.
Didn't he say, this fictional story that what was the name of that book that they wrote that he said they claim is fictional? It's called Heller's Tale. The Antarctic
I bought the book, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. I want to read this too, because apparently, he kind of said, they talk about some welder there, and that's definitely not me.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously, right. He's referring to himself there. So I wonder, though.
This guy, I like this guy. This guy's cool. He's a good guy.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They say it's called Heller's Tale, his last name is Hecker. It's not that far off,
Not that far off, but it's purely fictional, and nobody should take it as nonfiction.
Right, as he states.
Yeah, but they apparently they destroyed the old pole.
Yeah, he mentioned they blew it up.
Yeah, they said they blew it up, and some vehicles disappeared into a hole, and they got to watch it. They got to watch this whole event because the place is too dangerous. But when I think he said that when he was talking to Stephen Greer about it, Stephen Greer pointed out that that's not where the old pole was.
Oh, really?
Right.
That's right. I kind of remember him saying that.
Yeah.
And so the real old pole was still there, and it was just theatrics to make it appear that it was no longer something they should be interested in.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Uh,
So one of the things is that the old pole had nuclear power, like in the 1950s, late 1950s, had nuclear power, and part of the reason why you can't go down there and stuff. So we looked into, what's going on with the old pole, like how come people can't get in there? Why is it off limits? And we did get problems with radiation. We did get like what seemed to be hot spots throughout the area of radiation. So there's definitely that. But there's another aspect as well, that it appeared that you've got some type of thing going on under there that is still being utilized with regard to the whole antenna array system that they have, from the IceCube to the laser beam to HARP to whatever else they've got going on there. There's some connection point where there's potentially some type of antenna material buried under the ground, where we're getting like sort of a microwave radiation as well for communication coming off of it. And so I think, and as also like a processing unit where communications are being processed in this area. And so I think there's likely some type of facility that's still all connected in, whether they say there's nothing going on there or not. And that's the whole thing with this area, is that just as Hecker has stated, this place is a communication hub, air traffic control for space, for what they're doing in space, for all the contacts that are out there in deep space, for other aliens that they have connected with. No, and so that's what's going on. I mean, it's the whole area, but there is some type of radiation danger when it does come to the old pole, and it's not necessarily a place that you would probably want to, go to just because it's off limits, because there is, wouldn't want to get radiation poisoning.
Well, I wonder, that energy system that you talked about, if that was, they had put that near there too, and the radiation could be from that, or if it's from the old technology.
It's all part of one and the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Because if they had that before the treaty and it was right in that area, they probably would have like brought in equipment for more exotic power supplies to that area as well, most likely. But it's like, when we remote view this, it's like this whole area is part of one thing, one big thing. You have a like, it's like an airport, right? So you have a person over there who's just sorting luggage. You have a person over there who is checking people in. They don't understand the mechanics of every single thing. You have a person that works on machinery over here, and these people don't understand what other people are doing. They have a general idea, but because of the compartmentalization, they can't even see past a wall.
Yeah.
Right. So it's huge. It's way bigger. And I'm sure there's more than 40,000 people that come and go from there over a year period.
Oh, for sure. And I wonder, like, really, who knows how big these bases really are and how many more of them there are. I mean, there's stuff there's stuff we can find, and then there's stuff we have no idea about. Do you remember that accidental release of data of people wearing those Fitbits in Antarctica a few years back?
No, what was that about?
Lindsay might be able to pull this up for us if we talk about it long enough. But basically, all of these people were wearing Fitbits. And
all right, well, what's a Fitbit to start?
Fitbit is like your Apple Watch, but it just kind of tracks your heartbeat and all of this stuff and gives you data back for exercising, et cetera, right? So here's the article here. Fitness tracking app Strava gives away location of secret army U.S.
Oh
Army
man,
bases. Now, if
that's
you look,
too funny.
yeah, if you look down here, so there was this mistaken data that basically showed heat maps of military bases, and I believe one of them was actually specifically Antarctica.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
And so underneath the ice, it showed like the tracking. Is this it, Lindsay? This is showing Afghanistan. We actually, in a previous episode, saw the data from this showing a base in Antarctica, but it's probably gotten wiped off of the internet if Lindsay's having a hard
Gosh, we got to dig that one up.
time. Yeah. It probably was in one of our earlier episodes on rise.tv where we were specifically talking about Antarctica. We had a few episodes on it. And it was just really funny. Like, this is how the entire subject of Antarctica came up, is like, if Fitbits are showing a little base and these people walking around in this area, what else is there? You know?
Right.
And what else is ever? I mean, really, it just raises questions about the entire planet because, you know, like
That's
where it,
absurd.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
man.
pretty funny stuff. We covered all kinds of things in this episode, and just about Eric Hecker, some of this technology related to the stuff that's powering these technologies, what these extremely low frequency waves can do. And we'd really like to know what you guys think. Did we miss anything? Is there anything that you guys would like to hear? We'd love to hear your comments or listen or read your comments below. Thanks for being with us today on this episode of Metaphysical. John, thanks for being with us. And we hope that you guys thought this episode was as out of this world as we did.